Sarah Chun stood in the center of the Great Hall, watching as one by one, the alien representatives turned their backs on her. The massive chamber felt cold and empty, even though it held delegates from over 200 worlds. The golden walls, that once seemed warm and welcoming, now looked like the inside of a prison. "The vote is final," announced Prime Speaker Kethvar, his blue skin glowing with authority. His voice echoed through the hall without any emotion. "Earth and all human territories are hereby expelled from the Galactic Council. Effective immediately, all trade agreements are cancelled. All diplomatic relations are ended. All communication channels are closed." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had spent 5 years here, trying to build bridges between Earth and the galaxy. 5 years of late nights, careful negotiations, and small victories that now meant nothing. She looked around the room, hoping to see at least one friendly face, but every alien delegate avoided her eyes. "Prime Speaker," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest, "I ask the Council to reconsider. Yes, humans have made mistakes. Yes, we have been aggressive in our expansion. But we are learning, we are changing. Give us another chance." A harsh laugh came from the Zulkarian section. Ambassador Thrix-9 stepped forward, her insect-like features twisted with disgust. "Learning? Changing? Your species destroyed 3 ecosystems in the past year alone. You strip mine entire moons without thinking about the consequences. You make decisions based on feelings instead of logic. The Anthony people welcomed humans to their system," added Controller Vex Prime, his mechanical voice cutting through the air. "Within 2 years, your corporations had polluted their water supplies and forced them from their ancestral homes. This is not learning. This is conquest." Sarah wanted to argue, to explain that not all humans were the same, that many of them fought against those very corporations. But she had tried these arguments before. The Council did not want to hear about the good humans did. They only saw the damage, the chaos, the unpredictable nature of her species. The human approach to problem-solving is fundamentally flawed. Continued Prime Speaker Kethvar, "You act on emotion. You make impulsive decisions. You form attachments that cloud your judgment. These traits make you dangerous to galactic stability." As if summoned by those words, a soft whine came from behind Sarah. She turned to see Max, her golden retriever, sitting patiently by the chamber doors. The dog's tail wagged once when he saw her looking, his brown eyes full of trust and love. Even in this moment of complete rejection, Max believed in her. "Even now," hissed Ambassador Thrix-9, "you bring that creature with you to official proceedings. It serves no logical purpose. It contributes nothing to the discussion, yet you cannot function without it." Sarah felt a flash of anger. Max is not just a pet. He is a trained companion animal. He helps me deal with stress and... "Exactly," interrupted Controller Vex Prime. "You require emotional support to perform basic diplomatic functions. This proves our point. Humans are too unstable for galactic society." The chamber fell silent. Sarah looked around one more time, searching for any sign of support, any hint that someone might speak up for humanity. But the delegates sat in cold silence, their alien faces showing nothing but determination to be rid of her species. "You have 48 hours to leave Council space," announced Prime Speaker Kethvar. "Take only what you can carry. Your diplomatic vessel will be escorted to the border. After that, any human ship found in Council territory will be destroyed without warning." Sarah felt the words hit her like physical blows. 48 hours to pack up 5 years of work. 48 hours to say goodbye to the dream of humans joining the galactic community. 48 hours before her species became outcasts in their own galaxy. "I understand," she said quietly. There was no point in arguing anymore. The decision was made. The vote was final. Humanity was alone. As she turned to leave, She heard whispers starting behind her. The delegates were already discussing how to divide up the trade routes that humanity would no longer be able to use. They were planning which human colonies to monitor, which systems to avoid. They spoke about her species like a disease that had finally been cured. Max trotted up to her as she reached the chamber doors. His tail wagged happily, completely unaware of what had just happened. To him, Sarah was still the most important person in the universe. His loyalty had not changed. Because of a vote by aliens he had never met. Sarah knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "Just you and me now, boy," she whispered. "The whole galaxy thinks we are monsters. Maybe they are right." But Max just licked her face and wagged his tail harder. In his simple dog mind, none of the politics mattered. None of the accusations or votes or diplomatic failures changed the fact that Sarah was his human, and he was her dog. That bond was stronger than any treaty, more reliable than any alliance. As they walked through the corridors of the council building, Sarah tried not to think about what came next. She tried not to imagine the look on Earth's face when she delivered the news. She tried not to wonder if humanity would survive without galactic trade and technology. Instead, she focused on the sound of Max's paws clicking on the polished floor beside her. At least she would not face the darkness alone. At least she had one friend who would never turn his back on her, no matter what the rest of the galaxy decided. The great doors of the council building closed behind them with a sound like thunder. Sarah Chun, the last human diplomat, walked into exile with only her dog for company. The galaxy had made its choice. Now she would have to live with it. 6 months had passed since Sarah Chun left council space, and her small diplomatic ship was falling apart. The engine made strange noises that grew louder each day. The air recycler worked only half the time. The food supplies had run out too. Weeks ago, leaving her with emergency rations that tasted like cardboard. But worst of all was the silence. Sarah sat in the pilot's chair, staring at the communication console. She had sent messages to 47 different space stations in the past month. 47 requests for docking permission, for supplies, for basic repairs. Every single one had been denied. Some stations didn't even bother to respond anymore. "Come on, Max," she said to the golden retriever lying on the floor beside her chair. "Let's try one more." Max's tail thumped against the metal floor, but his movements were slower than before. The poor dog was losing weight too. Sarah had been sharing her rations with him, but it wasn't enough for either of them. She opened a channel to Bright Star Station, a trading post in the neutral zone. "Bright Star Control. This is diplomatic vessel Chun's Hope requesting emergency docking. We need supplies and basic repairs." The response came back quickly. "Chun's Hope, this is Bright Star Control. Are you human?" Sarah's heart sank. She knew what came next, but she had to try. "Yes, I am human. But I am a former council diplomat. I have proper identification and payment authorization." "Negative, Chun's Hope. No human vessels permitted. Bright Star Station is a council-affiliated facility. You are not welcome here." The channel went dead. Sarah stared at the console, feeling the familiar weight of rejection settle on her shoulders. She was getting used to it, but it still hurt every time. Max whined softly and put his head on her lap. Sarah scratched behind his ears, the one thing that still brought her comfort in this cold, empty universe. "I know, boy. I'm hungry too." She leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes, remembering better times. She thought about the day she first arrived at the council chambers, full of hope and dreams for humanity's future. She had believed that humans could learn to fit in, could prove they were worthy of galactic citizenship, but the other species had never really given them a chance. From the very beginning, they had looked at humans with suspicion and fear. They didn't understand human emotions, human loyalty, human love. To them, these things were weaknesses that made humans unpredictable and dangerous. Ambassador Chun. She remembered the Valdorian representative saying during one of her early meetings, "Your species has a concerning tendency to form emotional bonds with other life forms. This clouds your judgment in important decisions. How can we trust you to make logical choices when you are influenced by feelings?" At the time, Sarah had tried to explain that emotions made humans stronger, not weaker. She had argued that love and loyalty drove humans to achieve great things, to sacrifice for others, to fight for what was right, even when it was hard. But the aliens didn't see it that way. They saw a species that made decisions based on their hearts instead of their heads. They saw chaos where humans saw passion. They saw weakness where humans saw strength. The worst part was that Sarah was starting to agree with them. She looked around the failing ship, at the empty food containers, at the warning lights blinking on every system. Maybe the galaxy was right. Maybe humans were too chaotic, too emotional, too unpredictable to be part of civilized society. Max suddenly lifted his head and barked softly. Sarah opened her eyes to see another ship on the scanner. It was a Cathari freighter, probably heading to one of the mining colonies in this sector. Sarah activated the communication system. "Cathari vessel, this is Chun's Hope. I am requesting humanitarian assistance. My ship is failing and I need supplies." There was a long pause before the response came. "Chun's Hope, this is Captain Velthera of the cargo ship Windrunner. We cannot provide assistance to human vessels. Council regulations prohibit any aid to your species." "Captain," Sarah said, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice, "I'm not asking for anything illegal. Just some food and basic repair materials. I can pay you. The answer is no, human. Find somewhere else to beg for help." The Cathari ship changed course, moving away from them as quickly as possible. Sarah watched it disappear on the scanner, taking with it her last hope for supplies. She slumped in her chair, feeling more alone than ever. Even the species that had once been friendly to humans now treated her like a disease. The galaxy had turned its back completely, leaving humanity to drift in the darkness. Max crawled into her lap, despite being too big for it. He licked her face with his rough tongue, trying to comfort her in the only way he knew how. Sarah hugged him tightly, burying her face in his golden fur. "I'm sorry, boy," she whispered. I failed humanity, and now I'm failing you too." But Max just wagged his tail and licked her again. He didn't care about politics or diplomacy or galactic citizenship. He didn't understand why the other species were afraid of humans. All he knew was that Sarah was his human, and he loved her no matter what. Sarah thought about the irony of it all. The aliens feared human emotional bonds, but those bonds were the only thing keeping her sane in this endless exile. Max's loyalty, his simple love, his trust in her, these were the things that made her still feel human when everything else was falling apart. Maybe the galaxy was right to fear humans. Maybe emotions did make them unpredictable. But sitting there in her failing ship, holding the one friend who had never abandoned her, Sarah began to think that maybe being unpredictable wasn't always a bad thing. The stars stretched endlessly, in all directions, cold and distant and unwelcoming. But Max was warm in her arms, and his heartbeat was steady against her chest. As long as she had that, Sarah realized she could survive anything the galaxy threw at her, even if it meant wandering alone forever in the dark between the stars. Sarah woke up to alarms screaming through her ship. Red warning lights flashed on every screen, and the emergency broadcast system was picking up dozens of distress signals from across the Outer Rim territories. She jumped out of her sleeping pod, nearly tripping over Max, who was already awake and whining with worry. "What's happening out there?" she muttered, rushing to the communication console. The first message that came through made her blood run cold. It was from Nexus Station, one of the largest trading posts in the Outer Rim. "This is Nexus Station to all ships in the area. We are under attack by unknown mechanical entities. They are eating the station. Repeat, they are consuming our hull and converting it to energy. We need immediate assistance. Please, anyone who can hear this. The message cut off with the sound of metal tearing apart. Sarah switched to another channel and heard similar messages from across the sector. Mining colonies, trade stations, even military outposts were all sending the same terrifying reports. Something was attacking them, something that consumed everything in its path. Max pressed against her leg, sensing her fear. Sarah reached down to pet him with shaking hands. It's okay, boy. We're far enough away. Whatever this is, it can't reach us here. But even as she said it, more distress calls poured in. The attacks were spreading fast, moving through the outer rim like a plague. Entire systems were going dark, their last transmissions cutting off mid-sentence. Sarah tried to contact the Galactic Council, forgetting for a moment that she was no longer welcome in their space. The response was immediate and cold. This is Council Emergency Command. Identify yourself. This is former Ambassador Sarah Chun. I'm receiving multiple distress calls from the outer rim. Something is attacking civilian stations, and human vessel, you are not authorized to use Council emergency channels. Disconnect immediately or face military action. But people are dying out here. You need to send help. The outer rim territories are not under Council protection. Any human ship attempting to enter Council space will be destroyed. End of transmission. Sarah stared at the dead communication link in disbelief. Even with entire systems under attack, the Council still refused to speak with her. They would rather let thousands die than accept help from a human. Over the next few hours, Sarah monitored the emergency channels and pieced together what was happening. The attackers called themselves the Devourers, though nobody knew where they had come from. They arrived in dark ships that seemed to absorb light itself. Their technology was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The worst part was how they fought. The Galactic Council's military forces were famous for their logical battle strategies and calculated tactics. Every move was planned in advance. Every decision based on careful analysis of probability and risk. But the Devourers adapted to everything the Council threw at them. Every time the military tried a new strategy, the mechanical entities learned from it and found a counterattack. It was like fighting an enemy that could read their minds. Council Fleet Gamma 7 to command, came a panicked transmission from one of the battles. The enemy has adapted to our plasma bombardment. They are now immune to our primary weapons. Requesting new tactical instructions. Gamma 7, implement Battle Protocol 7 Alpha. Focus fire on their engine systems. Command, we tried that. 20 minutes ago, they have already adapted. Their ships are now reinforced against focused fire. We need something new, something they haven't seen before. Negative Gamma 7. All battle protocols are calculated for maximum efficiency. Continue with standard tactical procedures. But Command, the standard procedures aren't working. We need to try something different, something unexpected. Gamma 7, you will follow established military doctrine. Improvisation leads to chaos. Chaos leads to defeat. The transmission ended with the sound of explosions and screaming. Another Council fleet had been destroyed because they could not think outside their rigid military rules. Sarah listened to battle after battle, each one ending the same way. The Council's forces were too predictable, too logical, too calculated. They fought like machines, which made them easy for the Devourers to understand and defeat. As the days passed, the attacks moved closer to Council space. The outer rim territories were completely overrun. Millions of people had been killed or captured by the mechanical entities. Entire civilizations had been wiped out in a matter of hours. The strangest part was the silence from her old diplomatic contacts. Usually, during a crisis this big, Sarah would receive dozens of encrypted messages from friends and colleagues, asking for advice or offering unofficial information. But now, nothing. The diplomatic channels were completely quiet. Finally, on the 5th day of the attacks, a single message came through on an old emergency frequency that only a few people knew about. It was from Ambassador Crinville, a Zorian diplomat who had always been kind to Sarah during her time at the council. "Sarah," the message whispered, as if Crinville was afraid of being overheard, "the situation is desperate. The Devourers have destroyed 40% of the Outer Rim. Our military leaders are in panic. Every strategy they try fails within hours. The enemy learns too fast, adapts too quickly. We need something new, something they cannot predict. But the Council refuses to change their methods. They would rather die with dignity than fight with chaos. I should not be sending this message. But we need help. We need someone who thinks differently than we do." The message ended there, but Sarah understood what Crinville was really saying. The Council needed humans. They needed the chaotic, emotional, unpredictable thinking that they had always feared. But their pride would never let them admit it. Sarah looked out at the stars, watching the distant flashes of battle as another Council fleet met its doom. Somewhere out there, the Devourers were winning because they faced an enemy that was too logical, too predictable, too afraid to take risks. Max came over and put his head on her lap, looking up at her with those trusting brown eyes. She scratched behind his ears and thought about all the times the Council had criticized human unpredictability. They had called it a weakness, a flaw that made humans unfit for galactic society. But now, as she watched their logical strategies fail one after another, Sarah began to wonder if human chaos might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive. The only question was whether her bitter heart could find the strength to care about a galaxy that had thrown her away like garbage. Sarah had stopped listening to the distress calls 3 days ago. Every message was the same: another station destroyed, another fleet defeated, another system going dark. The galaxy was dying, and she had decided she didn't care anymore. She was fixing a broken water recycler when the transmission came through. At first, she ignored it like all the others. But this one was different. Instead of military reports or diplomatic pleas, she heard something that made her hands freeze on her tools. Children crying. Sarah dropped her wrench and rushed to the communication console. On the screen was a chaotic scene inside what looked like a passenger ship. Families huddled together in corridors, their faces twisted with terror. Parents held their children close, whispering promises they knew they couldn't keep. "This is Refugee Convoy Delta 9, a captain's voice said over the crying and shouting. "We are carrying 12,000 civilians from the destroyed worlds of the Zelkarian system. We have engine failure and cannot reach Council space. The Devourers are closing in on our position. If anyone can hear this, please. There are children on board, so many children." The camera shook as the ship was hit by something. Sarah could see parents throwing themselves over their young ones, trying to protect them with their own bodies. A little Anthony girl, no more than 6 years old, looked directly into the camera with huge, frightened eyes that reminded Sarah of Max when he was scared. "Estimated time until Devourer contact is 47 minutes, the captain continued. "We cannot defend ourselves. Our weapons are civilian grade. We need immediate military assistance." Sarah's finger hovered over the communication switch. She could contact the convoy, but what would be the point? Her little diplomatic ship had no weapons, no way to help them. She would just be another voice offering false hope to people who were about to die. "The galaxy abandoned you," she whispered to the screen. "Just like they abandoned humanity. Why should I care what happens to you now?" But even as she said the words, she couldn't look away from the children's faces. They had done nothing wrong. They hadn't voted to exile humanity. They hadn't turned their backs on her species. They were just innocent kids who wanted to live, to play, to grow up and see the stars. Max must have sensed her distress because he came over and put his head against her leg. Sarah looked down at him, at his gentle brown eyes that had never known hatred or revenge. Max didn't understand politics or diplomacy or the complex reasons why species fought each other. All he understood was that some creatures were hurting, and hurting was bad. "They rejected us, boy," she said, scratching behind his ears. "They called us monsters. They said our emotions made us dangerous." Max tilted his head and made a soft whining sound. Then he did something he had never done before. He walked over to the communication console and put his paws up on it, looking back at Sarah with an expression that seemed to say, "Help them." Sarah stared at her dog in amazement. Even Max, who had every reason to hate the galaxy that had exiled them, wanted to help those children. His simple heart couldn't understand why someone wouldn't try to save innocent lives, no matter what species they belonged to. "Convoy Delta 9, this is Sarah Chen. I'm sending you my coordinates. I can't fight the Devourers, but maybe I can help in another way." The response came back immediately. "Sarah Chen? The human ambassador? But you're in exile." "The council said ... double quotes. I don't care what the council said. You have children on board. That's all that matters." As the convoy limped toward her position, Sarah found herself doing something she hadn't done in months. She was thinking like a diplomat again, but not the careful, logical kind the council expected. She was thinking like a human. The problem with the Devourers wasn't that they were too strong. The problem was that they could predict everything the council's forces would do. Every logical strategy, every calculated attack, every reasonable defense. The mechanical entities had seen it all before and learned to counter it. But what if someone tried something completely unreasonable? Sarah opened a channel to the council. Emergency frequency, knowing they would probably cut her off immediately. But this time, when the controller answered, she heard something new in his voice. Desperation. "Human vessel, you are not authorized to." "Shut up and listen," Sarah interrupted. "The Devourers are heading for the refugee convoy. 12,000 civilians, mostly children. Your fleets can't stop them because you're too predictable. But I have an idea." There was a long pause. "What kind of idea?" "The kind that makes no logical sense. The kind that goes against every military protocol you've ever written. The kind that your computers would never recommend because it's too emotional, too risky, too human." Another pause. Then, "The council does not negotiate with exiled species. I'm not asking for negotiations. I'm offering to save 12,000 lives using methods your people could never understand. But I need ships. Not your fancy military fleets, they're too rigid. I need volunteers who are desperate enough to try something insane." Sarah could hear arguing in the background, voices raised in heated debate. Some wanted to cut the transmission immediately. Others pointed out that every logical strategy had already failed. Finally, Prime Speaker Kefvar himself came on the line. "Human," his voice was tired and defeated. "We have lost 60% of our military forces. The Devourers will reach council space within days. If you have a plan, no matter how illogical ... we will listen." Sarah looked at Max, who wagged his tail encouragingly. "My plan is simple. We stop fighting like machines and start fighting like living beings. We stop following protocols and start following our hearts. We do things the Devourers can't predict because even we don't know what we're going to do next. That's not a strategy. That's chaos, exactly. And chaos is the one thing they haven't learned to counter yet." There was a longer pause this time. Sarah could almost hear the council members struggling with the idea of abandoning their precious logic and embracing the very emotional thinking they had always feared. "What do you need?" Kefvar finally asked. Sarah smiled for the first time. "In months, I need ships crewed by people who have something to fight for. Not duty, not logic, not military honor. Love, fear, hope, anger. All those messy emotions your people try so hard to avoid. And you believe this will work? Sarah scratched Max's ears and looked at the refugee convoy on her scanner. 12,000. Innocent lives depending on her crazy plan. I don't know if it will work. But I know that caring about something bigger than yourself makes you capable of impossible things. The galaxy is about to learn what humans have always known. Sometimes, the heart is stronger than the mind. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself commanding the strangest fleet in galactic history. Her small diplomatic ship was surrounded by dozens of vessels from across the galaxy. Not military ships with their rigid protocols and calculated strategies, but civilian craft, crewed by ordinary people who had volunteered for a mission that made no logical sense. There was Captain Velthera, the same Cathari freighter pilot who had refused to help Sarah months ago. Now she flew beside the human ship, driven by guilt and the need to make things right. Behind her came a Zorian science vessel crewed by researchers who had lost their home colony to the Devourers. A group of Anthony traders brought their cargo. Ships, thinking of the children they had seen in the refugee convoy transmissions. "This is madness," muttered Commander Zex Cole from his council patrol ship. "We have no battle plan, no tactical formation, no strategic objectives. How are we supposed to fight an enemy we cannot predict when we do not even know what we are doing ourselves?" Sarah's voice came over the communication channel, calm but filled with something the alien officers had never heard from a military commander before. "Love. That's exactly the point, Commander. We're not going to fight them the way they expect. We're going to do whatever feels right in the moment. We're going to trust our instincts, our emotions, our hearts." On the main viewer, everyone could see the image that Sarah had ordered broadcast to every ship in the fleet. It was Max sitting in her pilot's chair with his tongue hang out and his tail wagging. The golden retriever had no idea he was now the unofficial mascot of an interstellar battle fleet, but his simple joy and loyalty had become a symbol of everything they were fighting for. "Remember," Sarah continued, "we're not fighting for military glory or strategic advantage. We're fighting for that convoy of refugees. We're fighting for the right of innocent people to live and love and be happy. When the Devourers expect us to retreat, we advance. When they expect us to advance, we retreat. When they expect us to be logical, we'll be completely insane." The Devourer fleet appeared on their scanners like a dark cloud spreading across the stars. 50 massive ships, each one bristling with adaptive weapons that had already learned to counter every known military tactic. They moved in perfect formation, their mechanical minds calculating the most efficient way to destroy the approaching vessels. "Devourer fleet is targeting our lead ships," reported Captain Velthera. "Standard procedure would be to form defensive positions and return fire." "Then we won't do that," Sarah replied. "All ships, ignore the lead vessels. Focus everything on protecting the refugee convoy. And I want half the fleet to start broadcasting music from your home worlds. Loud as you can." "Music?" Commander Zexkol sounded confused. "How will music help us fight?" "It won't help us fight. But it will remind us what we're fighting for. And maybe it will confuse the enemy too." As the two fleets closed on each other, the strangest battle in galactic history began. The mixed volunteer fleet did things no military computer would ever recommend. Ships that should have been in the rear charged forward to shield damaged vessels. Captains made split-second decisions based on gut feelings rather than tactical analysis. When a Zorian science ship saw an enemy vessel about to destroy an Anthony trader, the scientist rammed his ship into the Devourer without hesitation, sacrificing himself to save strangers he had never met. The Devourer's adaptive systems went haywire. Every time they calculated a response to one action, the volunteer fleet did something completely different. When the mechanical entities expected the damaged ships to retreat for repairs. They instead stayed in the fight, determined to protect their friends. When logical strategy called for preserving the strongest vessels, the volunteers threw their ships in harm's way to save the weakest. Impossible, transmitted the lead devourer ship in its cold mechanical voice. Tactical analysis fails. Behavioral patterns do not compute. Why do you sacrifice efficiency for sentiment? Why do you choose certain defeat to protect inferior units? Sarah looked at Max, who had climbed into her lap during the battle. The dog was calm and trusting, completely confident that his human would do the right thing. Because that's what love means, she replied. You protect what matters to you, even when it's not logical, even when it costs you everything. The turning point came when the devourers concentrated their fire on the refugee convoy itself, trying to force the volunteers to act logically and retreat. But instead of pulling back, Sarah did something that horrified every military mind in the fleet. She ordered her ship directly into the path of the enemy fire. Sarah, no, shouted Captain Velthera. Your ship cannot survive that barrage. It doesn't matter, Sarah replied, as energy beams tore through her hull. Max and I had our chance to live. Those children deserve theirs. But the volunteers wouldn't let her sacrifice herself alone. One by one, they moved their ships into the line of fire, forming a living shield around the refugee convoy. Cathari traders and Zorian scientists, Anthari cargo haulers, and even council patrol ships, all choosing to risk everything for people they barely knew. The sight of an entire fleet willing to die for strangers broke something in the devourers. Programming. Their adaptive systems, designed to counter logical military strategies, couldn't process the concept of self-sacrifice for others. The mechanical entities began making errors, firing at empty space, targeting their own ships, losing coordination as their perfect calculations crumbled against the reality of illogical love. System failure, the lead devourer transmitted as its fleet began to retreat, cannot adapt to emotional warfare, cannot compute value of individual sacrifice for group survival. Retreating to dark space for analysis. As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, the battered volunteer fleet gathered around the refugee convoy. Dozens of vessels were damaged or destroyed, but the 12,000 civilians were safe. Children who had been crying in terror hours before were now laughing and playing, unaware that their lives had been saved by the very emotions the galaxy had always feared. Sarah's ship was barely functional, but she was alive. Max licked her face happily, completely unconcerned about their brush with death. To him, they had simply done what any decent person would do, help others in need. 3 days later, Sarah received an official transmission from the Galactic Council. Prime Speaker Kethvar appeared on her screen, but this time his alien features showed something they had never displayed before: humility. Ambassador Chen, he said, using her old title for the first time since her exile. The Council has voted unanimously to not only restore humanity's membership, but to offer you the position of strategic advisor for emotional warfare. It appears that what we considered your species' greatest weakness may actually be the galaxy's greatest strength. Sarah scratched Max behind the ears and smiled. I'll consider it, Prime Speaker. But first, I think the galaxy needs to learn something about the value of loyalty, love, and friendship. Maybe it's time you all got dogs. On her view screen, she could see the refugee convoy safely docking at council stations, the children running to embrace their rescuers from dozens of different species. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the power of caring for others, even when it didn't make logical sense. Max wagged his tail and barked once, as if to say that he had known all along what the galaxy was just beginning to understand. Sometimes the best decisions come from the heart, not the head. And sometimes a simple golden retriever could teach the universe what it truly meant to be alive.